She said it like she was doing me a favor. Dad, it just makes sense. You're rattling around in that house by yourself. We have the space. And honestly, we could use the help. That was my daughter talking. She said we could use the help, the same way you'd say we could use a second car. Practical, casual, no weight to it at all. I was 61 years old, 2 years out from burying my wife of 34 years, and my daughter had just reduced me to a utility. I didn't say that, of course. I said, let me think about it. But I already knew I was going to say yes. That's the thing nobody tells you is about grief. It doesn't just take the person. It takes your judgment too, for a while. Everything feels temporary and nothing feels worth fighting for, so you just go along. You tell yourself it's practical. You tell yourself family is family. I sold my house in Barrie for $412,000. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow on a quiet street, modest but mine. My wife and I had paid off the mortgage 6 years before she got sick. I'd planted 2 sugar maples in the front yard when we first moved in. They were tall enough to give real shade by the time I left. I put most of the money in a GIC and drove to Mississauga with my truck packed and a storage unit rented for everything that wouldn't fit. My son-in-law, a man I'll call my son-in-law because I've run out of better names for him, shook my hand at the door. He had a handshake like a real estate agent, firm, practiced, gone before you felt it. He showed me to my room without asking if I needed a minute. It was on the main floor, past the laundry room, beside the door to the garage. The window faced the side of the neighbor's fence. It's a good size, he said. It was not a good size. My daughter hugged me in the kitchen later that evening. She smelled like the same shampoo she'd used since university, and for a moment I forgot everything and just stood there holding her. We ate dinner together. She'd made pasta, nothing fancy, and she asked about the drive down, and I told her about the construction on the 400, and it felt almost like something. I unpacked my books. I hung a photo of my wife on the wall beside the window. I set my alarm for 6:30 the next morning out of habit, even though I had nowhere to be. The pattern started slowly. That's how these things always start. Slowly, so you don't notice until it's already the shape of your life. The first week, my daughter asked if I wouldn't mind getting the groceries since I was around anyway. I didn't mind. I'd always liked grocery shopping. There's something calming about it, the rows and the routine. I went to the Loblaws on Burnhamthorpe, took my time, found a good price on the chicken thighs. The second week, my son-in-law mentioned, almost in passing, that the lawn needed doing. He said it the way men say things they've already decided. The lawn needs doing, with a slight pause that suggests you're the one who'll be doing it. I got the mower out of the garage that Saturday. It was a good machine, actually. I didn't mind. The third week, my daughter asked if I could be around on Thursday, because the plumber was coming between 1 and 4. I was around. The plumber came at 3:50. By the end of the first month, I was doing the grocery runs twice a week, mowing the lawn, taking my grandson to school 3 mornings out of 5. He was 7. A quiet kid who liked dinosaurs and had his mother's eyes. And I'd started making dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays because my son-in-law worked late those nights, and my daughter said she was slammed. None of this was ever discussed. Nothing was ever asked directly. It accumulated the way snow accumulates. You don't notice each flake. What I did notice, around the 6-week mark, was that my son-in-law had started leaving things outside my bedroom door. The first time it was a pair of his pants with a dry cleaning tag still on the pocket. They were just sitting there in the hallway, folded, waiting. I brought them to the dry cleaner. I didn't say anything. The second time was a pile of clothes, his shirts, his socks, a jacket. Just there, in the morning, when I opened my door. I stood and looked at them for a long moment. Then I stepped over them and went to make my coffee. My daughter came into the kitchen 20 minutes later. "Oh, did you see the laundry pile? He's been wearing that jacket all week and it needs a wash before." "I saw it," I said. "Would you mind? Just throw it in with yours. I want to be honest here." I didn't say what I was thinking. I said sure. And I washed his clothes because I didn't yet know what I know now, which is that sure is the most expensive word a person can say. I started keeping a small notebook around that time. Not for any particular reason. My wife had always kept journals, and I suppose some of it rubbed off. I wrote down what I did each day: groceries, school drop-off, dinner, lawn, dry cleaning, the plumber, the recycling I started putting out because nobody else seemed to remember what day it was. I wasn't planning to do anything with the list. I think I just needed to see it. In early November, my daughter told me they were having people over for dinner on the Saturday. Her husband's colleagues, 8 guests, a proper dinner party. I was thinking, she said, that maybe you could do your roast chicken. You know, the one with the herbs. I make a good roast chicken. My wife used to say it was the one thing I did better than her, which wasn't exactly true but was generous of her to say. I agreed to make the chicken. Then she said, and maybe an appetizer? Something easy. And then the next morning, could you do a dessert? People always ask about your butter tarts. By Thursday, I had a full menu. By Friday, I had spent just over $200 at the grocery store, my money, and had been in the kitchen for the better part of both afternoons. On Saturday, I set the table, put out the water glasses, arranged everything the way my wife had taught me, and went to shower and change. My daughter found me in the hallway. Dad, she said, it might be a little awkward. You don't know these people, and it's really more of a work thing for him. Do you think you could maybe just eat in your room? Or keep low, just for the evening? I looked at her for what felt like a long time. She looked back at me. She didn't look ashamed. She looked inconvenienced. I'd feel more comfortable, she said. I went to my room and ate a plate of the chicken I had cooked, sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to the sound of laughter from the dining room. I heard my son-in-law's voice carrying over the others, expansive and confident, the voice of a man hosting a dinner party. I heard someone compliment the chicken. I heard him say, "Thanks, we put a lot into it." I sat there for a while after I finished eating. I looked at the photo of my wife on the wall. She had this expression in it, slightly amused, like she'd just heard something absurd and was deciding how to respond. Looking at her that night, I thought, she would know exactly what to say right now. I had never once in 34 years doubted that. What she would probably say, I decided, was, "Stop waiting for an invitation to your own life, Allan." That was the night things shifted. I didn't make a scene. I want to be clear about that. I have never in my life made a scene, and I wasn't about to start at 61. But I made a decision, quietly, the way you make the important ones. The next morning I called a former colleague of mine who'd retired to a condo near the waterfront in Burlington. We'd worked together for 20 years at the same engineering firm, and he was the kind of man who gives good advice without much preamble. I told him roughly what the situation had become. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than people think. When I finished, he said, "You want me to ask around about rentals?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He came back to me 4 days later with 3 options. One was a 2-bedroom apartment in a low-rise in Burlington, close to the lake. The building was quiet, older tenants, mostly, on-site laundry, parking included, $1,350 a month, which in this market was a number worth taking seriously. I went to see it on a Wednesday afternoon. The super was a woman in her 50s who wore practical shoes and answered questions directly. The apartment smelled clean. The windows faced west, and in the evening, she told me, you could see the light on the water. I signed a lease that afternoon. I didn't say anything to my daughter that week, or the next. I called a moving company and booked a Saturday 6 weeks out. I retrieved the key pieces of my furniture from storage. I started quietly bringing my books to my car in boxes, a few at a time, and driving them to Burlington on the days I took myself out for lunch. I found a good diner near the new apartment. I sat by the window and ate my soup and read, and I thought, yes, this is what my days are supposed to feel like. The photo of my wife came down from the wall last. I wrapped it carefully and put it in the passenger seat of the truck. She rode the whole way. The Saturday of the move, I had the truck loaded and was ready to go by 8:30. My daughter had left early for a yoga class. My son-in-law was somewhere in the house. My grandson was at a friend's place. I left a handwritten note on the kitchen table. It said, "I've found my own place. I'll call once I'm settled. My key is on the counter, Dad." I put the key down beside the note and I walked out. I want to tell you what I felt driving away because I think it matters. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something more like the way you feel after a long flight when you finally step outside. That first breath of real air after hours of recycled air, and the ground feels solid under you, and you think, yes, there it is. I spent that first afternoon arranging my furniture. I put my books on the shelves in order I liked, not alphabetical, not by color, but the way I've always done it, by some internal logic that makes sense to me and nobody else. I hung my wife's photo on the wall, across from the window so she faces the light. I made a simple dinner, eggs and toast, and sat at my own kitchen table and ate it without having anywhere else to be. I called my grandson that evening. He said, "Grandpa, where are you?" And I told him I'd found my own place near the lake and that he could come visit, and we'd go look for birds on the waterfront path. He said, "Can we look for ducks?" And I said, "Yes, we could definitely look for ducks." That was a good conversation. The calls started 4 days later. My daughter twice, then 3 times. Then a voicemail I didn't listen to right away. Then my son-in-law called, which surprised me. He'd never once called me in 4 years. It was a short message, clipped, slightly bewildered, as if he couldn't quite believe the logistics of what had happened. By the end of the week, there were 26 missed calls between the two of them. By the following Monday, 31. I called her back on a Tuesday, 12 days after I'd moved out. I let it ring twice, sat with the phone in my hand, then picked up. She was upset. She said she'd been worried. She said it wasn't right the way I'd left without talking to her. She said she hadn't realized, and here she paused, she hadn't realized things had gotten to that point. I let her talk, I didn't argue. When she finished, I said, "I know. And I want you to know I don't have any hard feelings. But I needed to make a decision that was right for me, and I made it." She said, "But we needed you here." I said, "I know you did." There was a pause, long enough that I could hear the hum of her refrigerator through the phone. The same refrigerator I'd stocked every week for 4 months. "What do I tell him?" she said. She meant my son-in-law. "What do I tell him about the groceries, the dinners, my grandson's school run, all the invisible scaffolding I'd quietly built and just as quietly removed?" "Tell him you'll figure it out," I said. "You will. I've been in Burlington 8 months now. I have a routine that's mine. I walk the waterfront path most mornings. Good path, well-maintained, connects down to a stretch along the shoreline where the herons fish in the shallows early. I volunteer 2 mornings a week with a woodworking program at the community center, helping older adults with hand tool skills. I've made 3 friends I'd call actual friends. My grandson visited last month. We found 11 ducks. My daughter calls more carefully now. The conversations are different, shorter in some ways, more honest in others. She came down to Burlington for lunch in February, just the 2 of us, and we sat at the diner I like and talked the way we used to talk when she was in university and would call me on Sunday evenings. She said, near the end of the meal, "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't see what I was doing." She looked like she meant it. I believed her. I'm not telling this story to make my daughter look bad. I'm telling it because for 8 months of my life I made myself smaller than I am, and I convinced myself that being useful is the same as being wanted. It isn't. Those are 2 completely different things. And if you're sitting somewhere right now feeling the gap between them, I want you to know, the gap is real, and you're not imagining it. My wife used to say that the bravest thing a person can do is decide, quietly and without fanfare, to treat themselves with the same care they give everyone else. She was almost always right about things like that. I sold a house in Barrie with 2 sugar maples in the front yard. I drove to Mississauga with a truck and a grief and a willingness to make myself small. And then one Saturday morning, I loaded that truck again, and I drove west, and I didn't look back. The light on the water here, in the evenings, she was right about that too.